Hey Wildcats, it's Miss Henson, and I'm here with just a quick tutorial reminder about how we're progressing on our Romeo and Juliet essay. So I know that when we first started working together, we took a moment to set our document in MLA format, which of course means that we set our font to Times New Roman, our font size to 12, we double spaced our document, we put in our header, which included our name, our teacher's name, the course, and the class block, the date the paper was due. We inserted our running header, which included our last name and the page number, making sure that the font and the size match the rest of our document. And we left a space for our title, because we said we could go back and decide what we were going to title our essay later. When I worked with you earlier in the week, we worked together to write a very quick introduction based on your thesis. So I would note your thesis template here comes right out of your direction page. So if you're looking at your direction document, you have a setup for your thesis right here. And we simply used that as a means to write our thesis and build our introduction. So in this case, my sample uses Romeo is a static and flat character who is driven by his desire for love. Now, you may have a different character. They might be a different combination of static, dynamic, round, or flat, and they may have a very different motivation. So those bold parts would be what you need to sub with your own information. I would remind you, if you look off the side of my document here, I make myself just some quick notes about the difference between static, dynamic, round, and flat characters. So first and foremost, flat characters are one-dimensional. They have a consistent portrayal across your text, whereas round characters are three-dimensional. You know their histories, their values, their fears, their goals. This is the difference between Crush the Turtle in Finding Nemo and Ralph in Wreck-It Ralph. So Crush in Finding Nemo is my favorite character because he loves the word dude, but he's pretty consistent. He's a chill, cool dude. He's important to Nemo's journey at that particular point, but he's pretty consistent. He does not change personality or beliefs or approach to the universe. Whereas Wreck-It Ralph is three-dimensional. He has a backstory and history. He's always been the bad guy, but he wants to be the good guy. And he fears that he won't make friends and things of that nature. Now, this is a little bit different from a character being static and dynamic. A character is dynamic if their outlook on the world changes. All right? They are static if their outlook on the world, the perception of the world, does not change. Now, 9 times out of 10, flat characters are going to be static. Round characters are going to be dynamic. Now, that being said, there are cases in which you can have a round character who is static. The one that comes to mind particularly is maybe Captain America. He is a three-dimensional character who has a background story, histories, values, fears, but I would argue that Captain America's outlook on the world and those core beliefs and values, they don't really change. He's very consistent across the multiple movies that he's in. So he would be a round, static character. They're not super common, but they do exist in other combinations. So as you're thinking your way through Romeo and Juliet, you need to ask yourself, one-dimensional or a three-dimensional character? Does their outlook on the world change as a result of what happens? Yes or no? And make a pairing accordingly. All right. From there, once you've decided on your character, whether they're static or flat, and what their motivation is, which is what is your character's motivation for what they're doing and why they're doing what they're doing, and you've articulated that, then you can write the rest of your intro. So we said in the first sentence, we wanted just a very broad-based sentence to get us into our introduction. Something like, while Shakespeare wrote many plays in his life, none seems to have been more culturally relevant than Romeo and Juliet. So what am I hitting on here? The fact that Shakespeare, he wrote a bunch of plays, but one of the ones that seems to have stood the test of time and people keep coming back to again and again is Romeo and Juliet. In my second sentence, I hit on the idea that in William Shakespeare's 1594 drama, Romeo and Juliet, he explores the nature of love and family through the character of Romeo Montague. So here, always important, make sure you tag the piece that you're writing about, title, author, genre, date, so your reader's very clear on exactly what you're talking about. I wrote down half sentence. What's the main point of this story? He explores the nature of love and family. And he does this through my character. Of course, I want to say he does this through my character because I'm getting to a thesis that's all about character. This is just one way to kind of go about setting up an introduction. But you want a broad sentence. If you don't want to focus on Shakespeare in this first sentence, you could most definitely maybe focus on a thematic aspect of Romeo and Juliet. Maybe something like, many stories include star-crossed lovers, which is originally derived from Shakespeare's text, Romeo and Juliet, or something of that nature. There's lots of different ways you could play on hate and family dynamics. You could play on, a war between two houses. You could play on, teenage love. There's lots of big, broad, basic comments you could use to get started there. And so that was what we did when we first saw each other. And then you worked with Ms. Gladden on your organizer to start getting your ideas together for your body paragraphs. Now, the one thing I would remind you is that what you talk about in your body has to prove this sentence right here. I'm going to highlight it yellow so I can see it easier in my document. I have to prove this. I have to prove that Romeo is static and flat. I have to prove that this is because he's driven by his desire for love. All right, so that's the big point. So what I've done here is I've kind of created a fill-in-the-blank template, all right, to get you started. I find oftentimes students have great ideas, but it's getting it into the right structure and using that academic language that comes with this type of writing that is what you need help with. So you might start, and you're going to need to start with a topic sentence, which is what this sentence is right here. The character Romeo, Juliet, Tybalt, Mercutio, whoever you're putting in the blank, is, pick your choice, static, dynamic, round, or flat, because, and that's where I would take my definitions and combine them here. Because if I'm going to say Romeo is static and flat, I would say Romeo is a one-dimensional character whose outlook on the world doesn't change. So you can use those ideas to put him in here. But if I'm going to say that Romeo is static and flat, he's one-dimensional, his outlook on the world doesn't change, then that is what I have got to prove in this paragraph. So I would think of one piece of textual evidence to prove that he's one-dimensional, one piece of textual evidence to prove that his outlook on the world doesn't change. That's how I would break that down structurally. Now from here, like I said, it's hard for me to get too specific because we have lots of people, different characters, different combinations, but I would remind you that you have got to cite evidence and then explain it. So what I'm going to do to maybe make this a little bit easier to differentiate on the page and on the screen, my sentences where I cite evidence, I'm going to make them blue, and my sentences where I explain, I'm going to make them green. I'm a big fan of color coding items just because it helps me kind of differentiate and keep track of what I'm doing. You certainly don't have to do this in your own document, but oftentimes in video form, it's a little bit easier to see what we're doing. So if my topic sentence here, I'm going to make it a color as well. Let's see, what colors do I have left to play with here? I'm going to make it pink. Oh, no, that's supposed to be blue. Just a second. My cursor's playing tricks with me here. Let's get it back to color it's supposed to be. All right. So you'll notice very quickly that in terms of the structure of a body paragraph, you've got a couple of things happening here. My topic sentence, you'll notice it's the only sentence like that in my paragraph because it has to lay out the position that I'm taking in this paragraph. I have two pieces of evidence. I would remind you, as of the 7th grade, you were required to provide two pieces of evidence to back up a position. And really and truly, one piece of textual evidence doesn't prove a whole lot. You're not going to prove that Shakespeare has fully developed a character as one way or the other if you can only find one example in a couple hundred pages. So two pieces here. Now let's look at just these blue lines. One of the things you have to remember when you're incorporating textual evidence, most students like to start with a quote, and that's fine, but I would note that there are 3 parts to inserting a piece of evidence, all right? And one of the tricks that I teach students, sorry, give me just a second. I have accidentally turned something on in the camera and I need to turn it off. Go away. Give me a pencil or something like that. All right. I'm going to come out here to the side. That's not working for me. Undo. exit drawing. Sorry, I'm trying to get to the review tab on my video here. There we go. All right, let me open that back up. That's easier. Thank you. All right, what I'm attempting to do is write a comment out to the side here, is that when incorporating textual evidence, this sentence has three parts. It has a signal phrase, which gives the author's name and a verb. You have your evidence, which is a quote in this case, and you have your citation, and that is your parentheses vaccine line, just like that. So if you take a look at this blue sample sentence over here, Shakespeare notes that that's my signal phrase. You should never, ever, ever start a textual evidence sentence with a quotation mark. Never, ever, 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 ever. That's a big no-no. All right? You should always start with, you're talking about how the author does their craft. How does Shakespeare do what he does? So you need to talk about him. This is a literary analysis. You are analyzing what Shakespeare did. So you're going to have to use his name and talk about him. So Shakespeare notes, you could say Shakespeare writes, Shakespeare comments, he says, he states, something like that. And then insert your quote here, not in all caps. That's just so you know where to put it. And then you have to have your citation. So signal phrase, evidence, citation. Now here I'll give you an example of what this citation looks like in practice, all right? So you write translated 2003, there should be a comma there, and then act scene line number. So what that means is maybe your quote you pulled from Act 4, Scene 3, and it was line 27 to 29. All right, so that's what it would look like. These first ones should be Roman numerals, big Roman numerals, then little Roman numerals, all right? And if you don't know your Roman numerals, just do a quick Google of Roman numerals, all right, and find a chart and use them accordingly. So Roman numeral, regular numbers, all right? Make sure that when you're typing your quote, you might say, in fair Verona, where we lay our scene to Hey guys, sorry, I'm back. I had to go take care of some things for the fire drill, so you can still hear that in the background. Where was I? I was writing our quote, all right, where I'm just quoting something off the top of my head from Romeo and Juliet. You'll notice that when I'm writing it, every time there's a line and I transition lines, I put a little backslash, right? And you can find that key. It's directly next to the shift key on the right-hand side of your keyboard. All right, so every time you change lines, you got to put the little slash mark there. So that's how you stick a quote in. All right, make sure you're quoting word for word. And remember, this is just a template to get started. There's a lot of flexibility here in terms of how you lead into your quote and how you say what you say, but that should be enough to get you started. Once you've added that piece of evidence, then you've got to explain. You could say in this passage, or, you know, when Romeo says this, or by making Romeo think this way, Shakespeare characterizes Romeo as loyal to his friends, or as, you know, maybe he's loyal to his friends, which shows that he's not willing to compromise or sacrifice this, that, or the other. All right? So you've got to make a cause and effect situation here where when Shakespeare does this to Romeo, or has Romeo do this, say this, yada, 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 it shows blankety, blankety, blank. All right? This blank should tie back to this blank. All right? Because you're going to say he's saturnine and flat because he doesn't change, All right, then you got to show me how he doesn't change. He was this way in the beginning,